Sometimes a woman reaches a point where staying put feels harder than starting over. The mail-order bride wasn't a new idea in the 1880s. It was often the only idea for women who'd run out of options and men who'd run out of hope. This is a story about one such arrangement. High in the mountains where the air was thin and second chances even thinner. It's about what happens when two people who've given up on being understood decide, against all reason, to try one more time. The carpetbag pulled at Martha's shoulder, leather straps biting through her dress, dust coated her boots, her hem, the back of her throat. She'd been climbing for an hour since the wagon driver refused to go farther. And the cabin finally appeared through the pine, smaller than she'd imagined. Darker, sitting alone against the mountain like a headstone. A man stood on the porch. Didn't move. Didn't call out a greeting. She stopped at the bottom step. He came down one, just one, and held out a burlap sack. "Week's provisions," he said. His voice was flat as creekstone. "If you're smart, you'll use it to leave." She looked at his face hard. Weathered then at his hands. The nails were clean. She took the sack. He turned back toward the cabin. The door stayed open behind him. Martha picked up her carpetbag and walked inside. "If you're settling in to hear this story, I'd be grateful to know where you're listening from tonight, whether it's a porch in Tennessee or a kitchen in Montana. There's something about knowing we're scattered across this big country but hearing the same story at the same time. Makes the distance feel a little smaller." The cabin was one room. Martha stood inside and let her eyes adjust to the dim. A table. 2 chairs, one missing a back slat. A rope bed against the far wall. Potbelly stove squatting in the corner. Ash pan full, the iron top thick with dust. She set down the carpetbag, ran her finger along the table edge. It came away gray. Spiderwebs hung in the corners like old lace. Mouse droppings scattered near the flower bin. No curtains on the single window, no quilt on the bed. Just a wool blanket the color of dirty snow, folded stiff at the foot. Everything here worked. Nothing lived. She found the provisions in a crate by the door. Salt pork wrapped in cloth. Cornmeal in a tin. Dried beans. Lard. Coffee. She touched each item, counted the days they'd last. The stove needed cleaning before it would burn right. She opened the ash pan and dumped it outside. Came back in, built a small fire with kindling from the box. The smoke curled wrong at first, then found the flue. While the stove heated, she unwrapped the salt pork, sliced 2 pieces, set them in the cast iron skillet. The grease started to spit. She mixed cornmeal with water in a bowl. No eggs, no milk, just mush that would fill a stomach. 2 tin plates on the table, 2 cups, 2 forks. The door opened. Silas came in. Looked at the table. Didn't sit. He took his plate and cup and walked to the window. Stood there with his back to her. Ate, standing up. Martha sat. The chair creaked. Her fork scraped the tin. His fork scraped. No other sound. She swallowed the mush. Tried once. "How long have you—" He set down his plate on the windowsill. Walked out. The door didn't slam. Just closed. Quiet as a held breath. His plate sat there. Half the food still on it. Night came on fast in the mountains. Martha lit a tallow candle. Washed the dishes in the bucket by the door. Water so cold it numbed her fingers. She dried her hands on her skirt. The rope bed creaked when she sat on it. Straw tick mattress underneath, rustling with every shift. She lay back, pulled the wool blanket up. It smelled like dust and years. Outside, a coyote called. Another answered. The wind pushed through the pines. The cabin creaked, settling into the dark. No sound from Silas. She didn't know where he'd gone. Then through the window she saw it, a thin line of lantern light from the barn. She turned her head. The light framed a shape in the doorway. A man's silhouette. Standing. Not moving. Just standing there like he'd forgotten what came next. She watched him for a long time. He never moved toward the cabin. Finally, she closed her eyes. The wooden hairbrush she'd seen on the mantel worn smooth. Bristles soft sat in her mind like a question she didn't know how to ask. Morning light came through the window, thin and gray. Martha woke to silence. The stove had gone cold. She built it up again. Boiled coffee in the dented pot. Drank it black from a tin cup while standing at the window. The barn door hung open. No sign of Silas. She found the garden by accident. Walking the perimeter of the cabin to see what else this place held. Behind the structure, tucked between the back wall and a line of scrub pine. A plot of earth marked off by stones, waist-high weeds choked the space, thistle, wild prairie grass gone to seed, but underneath, buried in the tangle, she saw remnants, sage. The woody stems gray and brittle, thyme stalks dried to sticks. What might have been lavender once, now just dead spikes poking through the mess. Someone had cared for this, planted it, tended it, then stopped. She knelt in the dirt. The ground was hard, baked by sun and neglect. She wrapped her fingers around a thistle stalk and pulled. The thorns bit through her skin. She jerked her hand back. Blood welled in 3 places across her palm. She wiped it on her skirt and grabbed again, this time lower, where the stem was thicker. Pulled hard. The roots gave suddenly, and she fell back. Landing in the dirt with the thistle clutched in both hands, she threw it aside and reached for the next one. The work went slow. Each weed had roots that ran deep or spread wide. Her hands bled in new places. The thistle thorns left red lines across her wrists. Sweat soaked through her collar. The sun climbed and beat down, and she kept pulling. A shadow fell across the dirt. She looked up. Silas stood at the corner of the cabin, 10 feet away, staring at her, at the pile of weeds beside her knee, at her hands. She waited for him to speak. He opened his mouth, closed it, turned and walked to the woodpile on the other side of the yard. Martha went back to the weeds. The sound of the axe started. Clean strikes, wood splitting, the rhythm steady. 20 feet between them, but she could hear every blow. Her hands pulling weeds, his axe splitting logs. No words. Just the sound of work in the mountain quiet. An hour passed. Maybe more. The sun was directly overhead when the axe stopped, footsteps in the dirt, coming closer. She didn't look up. Kept pulling at a stubborn root. Fingers deep in the soil. Something touched the ground beside her. She glanced over. A wooden bucket. Water inside. Clear and cold. Beads of moisture on the outside. Silas's boots walked away. She sat back on her heels. Her hands shook. She plunged them into the bucket. The cold bit into the cuts. She cupped water and drank. It tasted like metal and minerals. She drank again. When she looked toward the woodpile, he was gone. By the time the shadows started to stretch, she'd cleared a patch no bigger than a wash basin. Her fingernails were black with dirt. Blisters had formed and broken on both palms. Her back screamed when she tried to straighten. But the sage was visible now. And the time. She'd found the roots of what might come back if given the chance. She reached for one more handful of grass, and her fingers touched something solid. Not root, not rock. She dug around it, pulled it free. A doll. Small. Cloth body stuffed with something that crackled corn husks, maybe. The fabric so faded she couldn't tell what color it had been. Dirt caked in the seams, one button eye missing, the other hanging by a thread. Martha held it in both hands, turned it over. Someone had stitched this. Careful stitches, small and even, made it for someone small. She stood, walked to the well, pumped water into the bucket, and dipped the doll, rubbed the fabric gently between her fingers. The dirt loosened, came away. She wrung it out and dipped it again. 3 times until the water ran almost clear. The doll was white, or had been, cream-colored now. The stitching dark thread. The remaining button a chip of brown wood. She carried it inside, set it on the windowsill to dry, stepped back and looked at it there in the light. When she turned around, Silas stood in the doorway. His eyes went to the doll. His face didn't change, didn't move. But something behind his eyes did. Something she couldn't name. He turned and walked out, not to the barn this time, toward the tree line. Kept walking until the pines swallowed him. Martha looked at her hands, at the blood dried in the creases, at the dirt under her nails. She went to the basin and washed. The water turned brown. She scrubbed her palms with the lye soap until they stung. Then she started cooking. Beans from the provision sack. She added a handful of the wild sage she'd salvaged from the garden. The leaves still green under the dead outer layer. The smell rose from the pot. Sharp, clean, like something alive. 2 plates on the table. The light was almost gone when Silas came back. He stood in the doorway, looked at the table, at the 2 plates. He came in, pulled out his chair, sat down. Martha sat across from him. They ate. Forks scraped tin, beans and cornbread and the wild sage. His plate emptied. He ate every bite. Set down his fork. Didn't get up. She waited. He looked at the windowsill, at the doll drying there. His jaw worked like he was chewing words too tough to swallow. Then he stood, pushed in his chair, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "Garden's been dead 3 years," he said. Didn't turn around. "Won't come back." He went out. The door closed behind him. Martha looked at the windowsill, at the doll, at the plate he'd left empty on the table. She carried both plates to the basin, washed them, dried them, put them back on the shelf. Outside. The lantern light appeared in the barn again, the same silhouette in the doorway. Standing, watching something she couldn't see. She climbed into bed. The straw tick rustled. The wool blanket scratched. Her hands throbbed, every cut and blister singing. But on the windowsill, The doll sat clean in the last of the light, and tomorrow she'd go back to the garden. The days found a rhythm. Martha woke before dawn, when the air was still cold enough to see her breath inside the cabin. She built the fire, filled the coffee pot from the bucket by the door, set it on the stove. By the time the coffee boiled, Silas would come in from the barn. He never knocked, just opened the door and stepped inside, poured himself a cup from the pot, drank it standing by the window, looking out at nothing in particular. She washed dishes while he drank. He'd set his cup on the windowsill when it was empty, walk back out. The door would close. She'd listen to his boots cross the yard, hear the barn door creak open. Then the sounds of his work would start. Hammer on nails, saw through wood, the creak of the wagon when he loaded it with feed. She scrubbed the floors, swept the corners where spider webs tried to rebuild, washed the window until light came through clean, scoured the pot-belly stove until the iron showed black instead of gray. The garden took most of her mornings, day after day, pulling weeds, turning soil, finding the plants that still lived underneath. Her hands grew new calluses over the old blisters. The cuts healed into white lines across her palms. Silas worked the far pasture, fixed fence lines, checked the stock. He'd come back at midday, eat whatever she'd left on a plate, then go back out. They moved around each other like dancers who knew the steps but never touched. She learned his patterns. He checked the north fence every third day, mucked the barn every morning, split wood when the pile got low. He never spoke unless he had to. But his silence wasn't cruel. It was just there, like the mountains, like the sky. On the 8th day, she mixed bread dough. She'd found a crock in the back of the cupboard with sourdough starter dried to a crust at the bottom. She scraped it out, fed it with flour and water, let it sit by the warm stove. It bubbled, came back to life. The next morning she mixed the dough, kneaded it on the table, flour dusting her arms to the elbows. The dough was alive under her hands, elastic, breathing. She shaped it into loaves, set them to rise under a damp cloth. When the loaves went into the oven, the whole cabin changed. The smell filled every corner, warm, rich, the smell of something being made instead of just maintained. She was pulling the bread from the oven when she heard his footsteps on the porch. Earlier than usual, middle of the afternoon, the door opened. Silas stood in the frame, didn't come in, just stood there. His nostrils flared. His chest rose and fell, breathing deep. He looked at the loaves on the table. 4 of them, brown crusts, still steaming. His hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles white. He turned and walked away, faster than usual, almost running. Martha set down the bread, looked at the empty doorway. The smell hung in the air between where she stood and where he'd been. That evening she wrapped 1 loaf in a clean cloth, left it on the table where he'd see it, took the other 3 to the shelf. She ate her supper, washed her plate, went to bed. In the morning the cloth was folded on the table, neat, precise. Only crumbs remained. The days kept turning. Martha found fabric in the bottom of the cupboard. Flour sacks. Empty. She cut the stitching, spread them flat, soaked them in a bucket with lye water to bleach out the printing, rinsed them until the water ran clear, hung them on the clothesline to dry. When they were dry, she hemmed them, sat by the kerosene lamp at night, needle and thread in her blistered hands, making small, straight stitches. The thread was coarse, her fingers clumsy, but the stitches held. She made 2 panels, long enough to cover the window, simple, unbleached white, clean. She hung them at dawn, stood on the broken chair to reach the nails above the window frame. The fabric fell straight, let light through but softened it, made the room feel less like a box and more like a place where people lived. She climbed down from the chair and stepped back to look. The door opened. Silas came in for his morning coffee. Stopped. His eyes went to the window, to the curtains. He stood there. Didn't move, didn't blink. 10 seconds, 20. His jaw worked. His throat moved like he was swallowing something sharp. Then he poured his coffee, drank it, set the cup down, walked out. That evening when Martha came in from the garden, the broken chair was against the wall, fixed. The missing slat replaced with a new piece of wood. Planed smooth, fitted tight, the joints re-glued, the whole thing solid. She ran her hand over the new wood. It was lighter than the old pieces, fresh cut, the smell of pine sap still in it. She pulled it to the table. Sat down. The chair held. The second week slipped into the third. Martha planted seeds in the cleared patches of garden. Basil, rosemary, mint. She'd bought them at the settlement, that trip she'd made alone, carrying supplies back on her shoulders. The seed packets were small, the paper thin. She opened them carefully, poured the tiny seeds into her palm, pressed them into the dark soil one by one. She watered them with dishwater, precious in the drought. Every drop counted. Silas was at the woodpile when she came around the cabin. She stopped. He stopped. The axe in his hands, a split log at his feet. They looked at each other across 20 feet of dirt. "Fence by the north pasture needs mending," he said. To the air. To the ground. Not quite to her face. She nodded. He shifted his weight. The axe handle creaked in his grip. "Ground's too hard for post holes. Rain coming soon." It was the most he'd spoken since the first day. 12 words, an explanation, almost an apology for not doing the work yet. "I'll wait," Martha said. His eyes flicked to hers, held for half a heartbeat, moved away. "All right then," he said. He picked up the split wood, carried it to the pile. She went back to the garden, but something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed. He'd spoken about the work, about the weather, about tomorrow. That night she made stew, beans and salt pork and wild onions she'd found growing by the creek. The smell filled the cabin. She ladled 2 bowls, set them on the table with 2 spoons. When he came in, he looked at the bowls, at the spoons, at the chair she'd pulled out on his side. He sat down. She sat across from him. They ate. The spoons scraped the bowls. The wind pushed against the cabin walls. The kerosene lamp flickered. When his bowl was empty, he didn't get up right away. Just sat there, hands flat on the table, looking at the wood grain. Martha waited. Finally, he stood, pushed in his chair, walked to the door, stopped, hand on the latch. "Bread was good," he said, still not looking at her. "Tasted like..." He stopped, cleared his throat. "Just good." He went out. Martha sat at the table and looked at his empty bowl, at the chair pushed in neat, at the curtains moving slightly in the draft from the closed door. She washed the dishes, dried them, put them away. That night when she looked out the window, the barn light was there, the silhouette in the doorway. But this time he wasn't standing still. He was moving, doing something with his hands, working on something she couldn't see. She lay down in bed. The rope creaked, the straw tick rustled. Outside, the lantern burned late into the night, and in the morning, she'd find something else repaired. Some small thing she hadn't noticed was broken until it was fixed. Martha woke to silence where there should have been sound. No crackle from the stove, no scrape of the coffee pot against iron. She lay still on the rope bed, staring at the ceiling beams, and listened to the cabin breathe around her. Empty. The kind of empty that pressed against the walls. She sat up. The potbelly stove held nothing but cold ash. Silas's cup sat on the table exactly where he'd left it the night before. Her feet hit the floor. The boards were cold through her stockings. She crossed to the window and looked out at the barn. The door hung open, swinging slightly in the morning wind. Wrong. Everything wrong. She grabbed her shawl and went outside barefoot, dew soaked through her stockings before she reached the barn. Inside, the smell of hay and horse sweat and something else. Something sour. Silas sat slumped on a hay bale, his shoulders curved forward like a man gut shot. His face had gone the color of old tallow. Sweat darkened his collar despite the morning chill. "Fence needs." His voice came out thick. He tried to stand, and his knees buckled. Martha moved without thinking. Her hand landed on his shoulder. First time she'd touched him. His shirt was soaked through, hot as a stove plate under her palm. "No," she said. "Inside." He shook his head, tried again to rise, made it halfway before his legs quit. She got her shoulder under his arm. He was heavy, dead weight leaning into her. They staggered out of the barn together, his boots dragging furrows in the dirt. 3 times she thought they'd both go down. Each time she locked her knees and held. The cabin door seemed a mile away. Then they were through it. Then he was falling onto the rope bed, and she was catching him, easing him back onto the straw tick mattress. His eyes were open, but they didn't see her. They looked past her shoulder at something else. Something not in the room. She pulled off his boots. Dirty work socks underneath, one with a hole at the heel. She left them on, got the wool blanket from where it lay folded at the foot of the bed and spread it over him. His hands clutched at it, pulled it to his chin like a child. The well-water bucket sat by the door. She grabbed a clean rag from the drawer, one of the flour sacks she'd hemmed into dishcloths, and soaked it, wrung it out. The water dripped between her fingers, cold enough to ache. She pressed the cloth to his forehead. He flinched but didn't speak. His skin burned against her knuckles. All day she moved between the well and the bed. Soak the cloth. Wring it. Press it to his face, his neck, his wrists where the pulse beat rabbit-fast under the skin. When the cloth grew hot, she'd take it back to the bucket and start again. She tried to spoon beef broth into him at midday. Had to hold his head up with one hand while the other guided the tin cup to his lips. Most of it ran down his chin, but some went in. She saw his throat work, swallowing. By evening, his eyes had gone glassy. He stared at the ceiling, and his lips moved. "Emma," just a whisper. told her I'd be home." Martha sat in the straight-backed wooden chair she'd pulled to the bedside. She didn't ask, didn't speak, just dipped the cloth again and wiped the sweat from his face. "Shouldn't have left." His voice broke on the words. "Should have been there." The cloth moved down his neck. His pulse hammered under her fingers. "Baby was coming. Doc said stay. But the fence." He stopped. His breath rattled. "The fence." His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His fingers locked around the bone, tight enough to hurt. His eyes found hers, wild and unfocused. "Don't leave," he said. "I won't. Promise. I promise." His grip loosened. His hand fell away. His eyes closed. She sat there with her wrist throbbing and watched his chest rise and fall. Uneven, too fast. The light died outside. She lit the coal oil lamp, but kept the flame low. Got up once to bank the stove and put more wood on. The cabin needed to stay warm. Fever or no fever. The night cold could kill. When she came back to the chair, his breathing had changed. Slower, deeper, but rough, like each breath scraped against something inside. She found herself humming, didn't plan it. The sound just came, a hymn her mother used to sing while washing dishes. No words, just the melody, low and soft. His breathing changed again, steadied, matched the rhythm of the tune. The cabin held the sound. The walls caught it and gave it back. For the first time since she'd arrived, the room felt like something other than a box of silence. It felt like a space where people lived. She hummed until her throat grew dry. Then she stopped and just sat. His face had gone slack in sleep. The lines around his mouth had smoothed. He looked younger, less like stone. Her hand rested on the edge of the blanket, not touching him. "Just close." The lamp burned down. She added more kerosene. Outside, an owl called. Then another answered. Near midnight, his fever spiked again. She felt it before she touched him, heat rolling off him in waves. Back to the well. Fresh water, new cloth. She worked in the dark, moving by feel. Lamp oil was precious. Couldn't waste it. His mumbling started again before dawn. "Not enough time. Never enough." A long pause. Tried so hard. She wrung the cloth until her hands ached, pressed it to his forehead and held it there. Should have told her. Should have. Morning came gray through the window. She hadn't slept. Her back hurt from sitting in the chair. Her eyes felt full of sand. She heated more broth, got a spoon into him. This time he swallowed without fighting. Some color had come back to his face. Not much, but some. The second day looked like the first. Well water, broth, the cloth cooling his skin. She dozed in the chair between trips to the well. Woke to find him watching her with fever-bright eyes. Then they'd slide closed again, and he'd be gone. That night she sang again. Different hymn. Same wordless melody. His breathing steadied like before. She watched his face in the lamplight and saw something ease in the set of his jaw. Third day, the mumbling stopped. He slept without thrashing. She checked his forehead and found the skin cooler. Not cold, just less like touching a stoveplate. She let herself sleep then, just leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes. The lamp had burned out. Didn't matter. Sun coming through the window made enough light. Fourth morning she woke to find the bed empty. Her heart kicked hard. She stood so fast the chair tipped backward and clattered against the floor. The door stood open. She ran outside. He was in the barn, leaning against the stall, one hand braced on the wood. His face was pale, but the gray had gone. He was dressed, boots on, hair wet like he'd dunked his head in the trough. He looked at her, really looked. His eyes tracked from her face to her hands to her feet in their dirty stockings. She became aware of how she must look. Hair falling out of its braid, dress wrinkled from 3 days of sleeping in the chair, face unwashed. "You should be in bed," she said. He didn't answer, just kept looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Or maybe seeing her clearly after days of fever dreams. Then he turned and walked out the back of the barn. She stood there, with the morning cold biting through her dress, watched the space where he'd been. The rest of the day, he stayed gone. She checked the north pasture, the creek, the line of cottonwoods at the property edge, no sign of him. By evening, she went back inside and made supper, set 2 plates, waited. Full dark came. He didn't. She ate alone, left his plate covered with a clean cloth, banked the stove, blew out the lamp, lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, heard the barn door creak open sometime after midnight, heard his boots on the dirt, not coming toward the cabin, moving away, toward the far fence line. She rolled onto her side and pulled the blanket up to her chin. The distance between them now felt wider than it ever had, like he'd taken all the ground they'd gained and burned it, like her 3 days of care had somehow made everything worse. But his voice kept circling in her head, that delirious grip on her wrist, the way he'd said it, "Don't leave." She touched her wrist where his fingers had been, could still feel the pressure, could still hear the break in his voice when he'd said the name. Emma. And suddenly she understood something she hadn't before. The wagon driver who'd refused to take her farther had mentioned it while helping her down. "Next supply run won't come through till first Thursday of the month. Ma'am, you'll be on your own till then." She'd counted the days in her head then, knew she had a way out if she needed it. But now she lay in the dark and realized the other women hadn't failed because they were weak. They'd failed because Silas had needed them to be someone they couldn't be. Someone already dead. She stared at the ceiling and wondered what Emma had looked like. If she'd hummed while she worked. If she'd sat by his bed and cooled his fever. If she'd been the one who planted the herb garden that was now coming back to life under Martha's hands. The thought didn't make her angry. It just made her tired. She closed her eyes and listened to the cabin settle, to the wind outside, to the silence that had returned, and tried not to think about the fact that Silas had said her name in his fever. She'd heard it twice, soft, like he was testing how it felt. Martha. But he hadn't said it since waking, hadn't said anything at all, had just looked at her with those clear eyes and then walked away. Like maybe seeing her clearly was the one thing he couldn't bear. 7 days. Martha stood in the cabin doorway and counted on her fingers. Once. Then again, to be sure. The burlap provision sack sat empty in the corner where she'd folded it flat after using the last of the cornmeal 2 mornings back. 1 week. Exactly what Silas had given her. The smart thing would be to leave. The wagon driver had told her before dropping her at the base of the trail. "Next supply run won't come through till first Thursday of the month, ma'am." She'd marked it in her mind, knew the date. Thursday was 3 days away. She could walk down to the main road, flag down Old Anderson, Ride back to the settlement. Send a wire. Go home. She turned and looked at the cabin, at the flour sack curtains she'd sewn and hung. At the table, she'd scrubbed until the grain showed through decades of grime. At the herbs drying on the windowsill, where the cloth doll had sat before she'd moved it. Her hands were scarred now. Blisters from the garden work had broken and healed and broken again. She looked at her palms. New calluses forming, the skin tougher than it had been. She walked to the root cellar and lifted the heavy door. The hinges screamed. Inside, the earthen walls held the smell of dirt and old potatoes. She counted what was left: 3 shriveled turnips, a handful of sprouted onions, 1 dusty jar of preserves with the wax seal cracked, not enough to last another week. She closed the cellar door and went to check the hen house. Wire coop that leaned to one side, held up by a fence post Silas had wedged under the corner. 3 chickens inside. Scrawny birds with patchy feathers. They'd given her 1 egg in the past 4 days. She scattered the last of the cracked corn and watched them peck at the dirt. The barn door stood open like always now. Silas's shadow moved inside, but he didn't come out. Hadn't spoken to her since he'd recovered. Just worked. Fixed fence lines, mucked stalls. Stayed gone from sunup to well past dark. When the rain had come 2 nights back, hard rain that drummed the roof and found every gap in the shingles, she'd listened to it and waited. Thought maybe he'd come inside. Stay dry. He hadn't. She'd lain in bed and heard him moving in the barn. The creak of the loft ladder. The sound of him settling into the hay. Now she stood in the yard and did the arithmetic. No food, no money left except what she'd been saving. No reason to stay except the stubborn thing in her chest that refused to call this finished. Thursday, 3 days away. She went inside and found her coin purse in the carpet bag, turned it upside down over the table. 2 silver dollars and 4 bits fell out. Everything she had left from 3 years of saving every penny from mending and washing, just enough to have afforded the train ticket and a fresh start if things went wrong. She looked at the money, then at the empty provision sack, then at the road that led down the mountain. Her feet started walking before she'd decided. Through the cabin, out the door, down the trail toward the valley. The walk took 2 hours. Dust coated her boots and the hem of her dress. Sweat stuck her collar to her neck. The sun climbed, and the air got thick. No shade on this stretch. Just scrub brush and rocks and the ruts cut by wagon wheels. The settlement wasn't much. A dozen buildings clustered where 2 roads crossed. Mercantile, livery, a church with white paint peeling off the clapboards. She walked past them all to the mercantile and pushed through the door. The man behind the counter looked up, gray beard, suspenders over a collarless shirt. His eyes went from her face to her dusty dress to the coins she set on the counter. "You the new one up at McRae's place?" She nodded. He shook his head slow, pulled a rag from his pocket and wiped his hands even though they looked clean already. "Women always think they'll be different." Martha picked up a 10-pound flour sack from the shelf, set it on the counter, added a tin of lard, a small cloth bag of sugar, 3 seed packets from the wooden box by the window, basil, rosemary, mint, heirloom varieties, the labels said, good for mountain soil. "I am," she said. He rang up the sale without looking at her, took her money, gave back 1 bit in change. She loaded everything into the empty provision sack, The weight of it pulled at her shoulders. 30 pounds at least, maybe more. "You want me to hold that till someone can fetch it with a wagon?" "No." She lifted the sack, got it settled against her back. The rough burlap bit through her dress. Her shoulders took the strain, and her legs locked to hold it. 5 miles is a long walk with a load like that. Yes. She turned and walked out. The door swung shut behind her. The walk back took 3 hours. She had to stop twice to rest. Sat on rocks by the roadside with the sack beside her and let her shoulders stop shaking. Then picked it up and kept going. The sun was halfway down when she reached the cabin. Orange light slanted across the yard. The barn door still open. No sign of Silas. She carried the supplies inside and set them on the table. Stood there breathing hard until the trembling in her legs stopped. Then she unpacked everything. Flour into the barrel, lard into the crock, sugar into the tin, seed packets into her pocket. When she had the strength, she went to the garden, knelt in the cleared soil, tore open the first packet. Basil seeds, tiny and black. She pressed them into the earth with her thumb, covered them, moved down the row, rosemary next, then mint. Each seed was a choice, each row a commitment. When the planting was done, she got the dishwater from the basin inside, carried it out and poured it over the rows. The water darkened the soil, soaked in and disappeared. She'd bring more tomorrow, every day until the seeds sprouted, until the plants grew tall enough to survive on their own. She sat back on her heels and looked at the garden. At the fence Silas had built. At the cabin behind her. At the barn where she knew he was working even though she couldn't see him. This was her place now. Not because he'd invited her, because she'd claimed it. Row by row. Seed by seed. Day by day of choosing to stay. She stood and brushed the dirt from her skirt, went back inside to start supper, built up the fire, mixed biscuit dough with the new flour, opened the preserves and heated them in the small pot, set 2 plates on the table, even though she knew he wouldn't come in to eat. But he would eat, later, in the dark, when he thought she was sleeping, and tomorrow she'd set another plate, and the day after that. For as long as it took for him to understand, she meant what she'd told the mercantile man. She was different. The biscuits baked. The cabin filled with the smell. She pulled them from the oven and set them on the table, ladled preserves beside them, poured water into both cups, sat down, ate alone. The food tasted like victory, even though it was just flour and fruit and water. When she finished, she covered his plate with a clean cloth, washed her dishes, banked the fire, blew out the lamp, lay in bed and listened to the silence. Sometime near midnight she heard it, the cabin door. Not loud, just the soft sound of wood moving against wood. Then footsteps, careful, like he was trying not to wake her. She kept her eyes closed, kept her breathing even, the scrape of the chair, the soft clink of the fork against the tin plate. Chewing sounds. The fork scraped again. Then the quiet sound of him drinking from the cup. Minutes passed. The chair creaked as he stood. His boots crossed the floor. The door opened and closed. She opened her eyes to the dark ceiling and felt her mouth curve. Not much. just enough. He needed what she offered. Even if he cold, she was up before the sun. Coffee already boiling when the first light hit the window. She drank a cup standing by the stove. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, coming up the trail fast. She set down her cup and went to the window. 3 riders crested the rise. Men she didn't recognize. Rough-looking. The kind that made you check where the doors were. They pulled up in the yard, dismounted. One of them saw her in the window and grinned, missing a tooth on the left side. She stepped back from the glass, and her heart kicked against her ribs. The barn door stood open, but Silas was nowhere in sight. The riders spread out. One fingered the clothesline where she'd hung washing yesterday morning. Another walked toward the cabin. She looked at the door. No lock, no bar, nothing between her and them except wood and will. Her burned hand from the coffee pot weeks ago throbbed. She pressed it against her skirt and made herself breathe. Then she opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The 3 men stood in her yard like they owned it. Martha kept her hand pressed against her skirt and counted the distance between herself and the cabin door. 15 feet. Maybe 12 if she ran. The one nearest the porch smiled, missing a tooth on the left side. His beard held food scraps she could see from where she stood. "You McCrae's new wife?" She didn't answer. Looked past him to the barn. Still empty. No movement from inside. "Asked you a question," the man said. He took a step closer to the porch. His boots hit the bottom step. "My husband's checking fence in the north pasture," Martha said. Her voice came out steady. That surprised her. "Won't be back till evening?" The second man laughed. Younger than the first. Hat pushed back, showing sweat-darkened hair. "That's so convenient." The third one hadn't spoken yet. He stood by the horses, hand resting on his saddle, watching her the way a dog watches a rabbit hole. "We can wait," the first man said. He climbed another step. Martha's throat went tight. She swallowed and felt it click. Then movement from the barn. Silas emerged from the shadow of the doorway. Rifle cradled in both hands. He didn't raise it, just held it there where they could all see. The men turned. The one on the steps stopped climbing. Silas crossed the yard. His boots made no sound in the dust. The rifle stayed level, not pointing at anyone yet, just ready. Martha saw his jaw set, saw the muscle jump in his cheek. He was going to shoot. Maybe not first, but he was ready to finish it. She stepped off the porch, put herself between Silas and the strangers. "There's coffee," she said, "if you want it." The words hung in the air like smoke. The first man blinked, looked from her to Silas to her again. "What coffee?" Martha smoothed her skirt with her good hand. The other one throbbed against the fabric. "I just made a pot, and there's biscuits left from breakfast." Behind her she heard Silas take a breath. Heard him start to speak. "Martha." She didn't turn. Kept her eyes on the strangers. "You can sit," she said. "I'll bring cups." The men looked at each other. The young one's mouth hung open. The silent one by the horses shifted his weight. Nobody moved. Martha walked past them to the cabin. Her legs shook, but she kept them straight. Climbed the porch steps. Went inside. The coffee pot sat on the stove where she'd left it. Still hot. She found 3 clean tin cups. Set them on a wooden tray she'd found in the corner cupboard weeks ago. Added the biscuits from the covered plate. 4 hard ones left over from her solitary breakfast. Her hands trembled. The cups rattled against the tray. She stopped, pressed her palms flat on the table, and breathed until the shaking stopped. Then she picked up the tray and walked back outside. The men stood exactly where she'd left them. Silas hadn't moved either, the rifle still in his hands, his knuckles white around the stock. She walked to the chopping block where Silas split wood, set the tray on it, poured coffee into each cup. The stream stayed steady, didn't spill. "Sit if you like," she said again. The first man looked at the coffee, at the biscuits, at her face. His hand dropped from his belt where it had been resting near a knife handle. He sat on the chopping block, picked up a cup, sniffed it like he thought she might have poisoned it, then drank. The other two stayed standing. But the young one reached for a biscuit, bit into it, chewed. Martha poured herself a cup, held it with both hands even though it burned through the bandage on her palm, sat on the porch step. She drank. The men drank. Silas stood with his rifle. The silence stretched. A crow called from the cottonwood by the creek. The wind pushed dust across the yard. Finally, the first man set down his cup, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Heard there was some strays come through here last week," he said. "Wondered if McCrae had seen them." Silas's thumb moved on the rifle. Found the hammer. Didn't cock it. Just rested there. "Haven't seen any," he said. His voice came out rough, like he hadn't used it in days. The man nodded, picked up his cup again, drained it, set it back on the tray, careful, like he was in a parlor and not a dirt yard with a rifle pointed at his spine. "Obliged for the coffee," he said. Martha nodded. Didn't smile. Didn't speak. The three men stood. The young one grabbed the last biscuit and shoved it in his pocket. They walked to their horses, mounted. The leather creaked. The horses shifted. The first man looked back at Martha. She met his eyes. Didn't blink. Didn't look away. He touched the brim of his hat. Just a small movement, barely there. Then they turned and rode down the trail. The sound of hooves faded. Became nothing. Martha sat on the step and watched them disappear. The coffee cup shook in her hands now. She set it down before she dropped it. Silas lowered the rifle, turned to her. "You could have—" He stopped, started again. "They were leaving," Martha said. "They were leaving. You don't know that. I do now." He stared at her. The rifle hung loose in one hand. The other hand opened and closed at his side. Opened and closed. "They could have hurt you. Could have. I was ready to— I know." He set the rifle against the porch rail, ran his hand over his face. It came away wet, not with rain. The sky was clear. "Why did you do that?" Martha looked at the empty trail, at the dust still settling where the horses had been. "Violence is easy," she said. "This way they'll tell others you're not alone here anymore." Silas sat down heavy on the step beside her, not touching. A foot of space between them, but closer than he'd sat since his fever broke. His hands rested on his knees. They were shaking, small tremors that made his fingers twitch. She looked at those hands and understood. Not fear making them shake. Something else. Something bigger. "You weren't afraid," he said. "I was. Didn't show it. Didn't need to." They sat. The sun climbed higher. The shadow of the porch roof shrank back toward the cabin wall. Martha picked up the coffee cups and stacked them on the tray. Her burned hand screamed when she gripped the handle, but she didn't let go. Carried everything inside. set it by the wash basin. When she came back out, Silas was still sitting on the step, the rifle still leaning against the rail. He looked at it, then at his hands, then at nothing. She sat back down, same distance between them, same careful space. "I thought I'd have to kill them," he said. Quiet. Almost too quiet to hear. "Thought that's what it would take to keep you safe. It's not. What if next time there won't be a next time? Not like that. You can't know. They saw a woman who wasn't afraid, and a man who didn't need to prove anything. They saw a home, not a target." Silas turned his head, looked at her face like he was seeing it for the first time, or seeing something in it he hadn't noticed before. "You protected me," he said. Not a question. A realization. Martha stood, brushed the dust from her skirt. "Protected both of us," she said. She went inside, left him sitting there with his shaking hands and his useless rifle and whatever thoughts were working through his head. The dishes needed washing. The floor needed sweeping. The normal work of a day. She did it all and tried not to think about how close it had come, how easily it could have gone different. Her burned hand throbbed. She unwrapped the bandage and looked at the blister forming across her palm, big as a silver dollar, the skin tight and shiny. She rewrapped it and went back to work. Evening came. She made supper, set 2 plates on the table. They sat and waited. The door opened. Not midnight, not after dark, full evening light still coming through the windows. Silas stood in the doorway. He looked at the table, at the 2 plates, at her sitting there. He came inside, closed the door behind him, walked to the table, sat down across from her. They ate in silence. But it was a different silence than before. Not the silence of avoidance. Something else. Something that felt like the space between words when you're trying to find the right ones. When the plates were empty, Silas set his fork down, folded his hands on the table, looked at them instead of her. "Emma was my wife," he said. Martha's hands stopped moving. The dishcloth hung from her fingers. Water dripped onto the floor. She didn't turn around, let him speak to her back. Sometimes that made it easier. "Fever took her," he said. "And the baby, 3 years ago come next month." The water kept dripping. She heard each drop hit the boards. "I told myself I didn't need." His voice caught. "Broke." He cleared his throat and tried again. "Didn't need anyone after that, but the cabin got too quiet. So I sent for help. Thought if I called them hired hands instead of wives, it would be different. Wouldn't hurt when they left." Martha turned, looked at him. His face was wet. He didn't wipe it, just sat there with tears running into his beard and his hands folded like he was praying. "But I couldn't." He gestured at nothing. At everything. Couldn't let them be her. Couldn't let them not be her. So they'd leave and I'd tell myself it was better. Easier. She set the dishcloth down, sat across from him, waited. "Then you came," he said, "and you didn't leave. And I didn't know what to do with that." The lamp flickered. Neither of them moved to adjust it. "I'm not her," Martha said. "I know, and I'm not leaving." Silas looked up, met her eyes. His were red-rimmed and wet and more honest than she'd ever seen them. "I know," he said. They sat. The lamp burned. Outside the window, the garden held its rows of new seeds, waiting to break ground. "The brush on the mantel," Silas said. "It was hers." Martha looked at the wooden hairbrush sitting where it had sat since her first day. Worn smooth, bristles soft. "I know," she said. "You saw it first day." "Yes." His hands unfolded, reached across the table, stopped halfway, pulled back. "I want you to have it," he said. If you want it." Martha stood, walked to the mantel, picked up the brush. The wood was warm, smooth as river stone. She could see the place where a woman's hand had held it. Every day, for years, she brought it back to the table, set it between them. "Thank you," she said. Silas nodded, stood, walked to the door, put his hand on the latch, then stopped, turned back. "Will you stay?" he asked. "I mean not as help, as—" he struggled with the word, couldn't find it. "As my wife, my helpmate, to build a life together. Not hired help, a true home." And Martha realized she'd been waiting for this question since the moment she'd stepped off that wagon 3 weeks ago. Martha looked at his face, at the lines around his eyes, at the gray in his beard, at the way his hands still gripped the door latch like letting go would mean falling. "Yes," she said. His hands loosened, just slightly. His breath came out in a rush. "You don't have to answer now," he said. "You can think." "I don't need to think." "Yes." They stood there with the table between them, and the lamp burning, and the night pressing against the windows. Silas didn't move toward her, didn't cross the room, just stood with his hand on the latch and looked at her like he was memorizing her face. Finally, he walked back to the table. Didn't sit. Just stood there with his hands gripping the back of the chair. "There's more," he said. "Things you should know before you decide for certain." "I've decided." "You don't know what happened, why they left, why I—" He stopped, started again. "Emma was pregnant when we married, young, both of us young. Came out here to homestead. Build something that was ours." Martha sat down, waited. "She was good," he said, quiet. "Emma. She laughed at things that weren't funny, made faces when she didn't like the food but ate it anyway. She'd hum while she worked. No real tune, just sound." He pulled out the chair, sat, his hands flat on the table. "The baby came early," he said. "Too early. She knew. The midwife knew. But we tried anyway." His fingers spread wide on the wood, pressed down. 3 days she labored. Baby came blue, never breathed, never made a sound. The lamp flickered. Martha reached over and turned up the wick. The light grew steadier. "Emma held her," Silas said. "Just held her. Wouldn't let go. I had to—" His voice broke. He cleared his throat. "Had to take her from Emma's arms, to wrap her, to bury her." His hands curled into fists on the table. "Emma followed 2 days after. Fever in the blood. The doc said, childbed fever, nothing to be done. She called for me at the end. That's what the midwife told me after. Kept asking when I'd be home. Kept saying I promised I'd be there." Martha didn't speak, didn't move. "I wasn't there," he said. "Day the baby came, I was in the north pasture. Fence was down, stock getting out. I thought I had time, thought I'd fix it quick and get back before—" He stopped, breathed. I was fixing a fence while my wife died, calling my name. The silence filled the cabin. Heavy, dense. That's why the garden's dead, he said. Emma planted it, tended it, said she wanted fresh herbs for the baby, for when she was nursing. After she died, I just let it go. He looked at Martha. The other women, he said. I brought them here thinking if I needed help instead of company, it wouldn't hurt. But every time one of them tried to clean or cook or fix something, all I could see was Emma doing it. And when they couldn't be her, when they didn't hum or make faces or laugh, I made it so they'd leave. Gave them the week's provisions and waited for them to go. His fists uncurled. His hands lay flat again. But you didn't go, he said. You stayed, and you worked, and you didn't try to be anyone but yourself. And that scared me worse than anything. Why? Martha asked. Because if I let you stay, if I let you in, then I'd have to admit Emma's really gone. That I can't keep her alive by keeping everything the same, by keeping everyone out. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the dark. When I got sick, he said. And you sat there all those days. I woke up once and saw you sleeping in that chair. Your hand was on the blanket, just resting there, not holding on, just present. He turned. And I realized you weren't trying to save me. You were just refusing to let me be alone. Martha stood, walked to where he was, stopped with the table still between them. I'm not her, she said. I know. I'll never be her. I know. And I can't promise to fill what she left empty. Silas nodded. His eyes were wet, but he didn't look away. I'm not asking you to, he said. I'm asking... He swallowed hard. I'm asking if you'll help me build something new, something that's ours, not hers, not a copy or a replacement, just ours. Morning came cold and clear. Martha woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed and went outside. Found Silas in the garden, building a new fence. Not the rough barrier he'd thrown up weeks ago. This one had corner posts set deep, rails measured and fitted, each piece placed with care. He saw her and stopped, hammer in one hand, nails in the other. Thought it needed doing right, he said. If you're staying, should be proper. Martha walked to where he worked, looked at the fence, at the rows of seeds underneath, at his hands holding the tools. Can I help? She asked. He held out the nail box. She took it, pulled out 3 nails, held them ready, held them. He positioned the next rail. She handed him a nail. He drove it home. 1 strike. 2. 3. The head sank flush. They worked. No words. Just the rhythm of hammer on nail. Rail after rail. The fence grew. The sun climbed. Sweat darkened Silas's collar. Martha's hands grew sore from holding nails, but they kept working. By noon, the garden had a proper boundary, had protection, had intention behind it. Silas stood back, looked at what they'd built. Martha stood beside him, close enough their shadows touched. It's good, she said. He nodded. Set down the hammer. Wiped his face with his sleeve. They walked back to the cabin together, side by side. The distance between them smaller than it had ever been. Inside. Martha made coffee, set out the last of the bread. They sat at the table and ate. The silence was different now. Full instead of empty. Comfortable. When the meal was done, Silas stood. But he didn't walk to the door. He walked to the windowsill, picked up the cloth doll, held it in both hands. His thumbs rubbed the faded fabric. His throat worked. She made this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For, he stopped. Couldn't finish. Martha stood, walked to the cupboard, found a piece of clean muslin, brought it to him. She took the doll gently, wrapped it careful, folded the edges neat. "Where's your father's watch?" she asked. Silas pointed to the shelf above the window. The small wooden box. Martha got it down, opened it. The watch sat on faded velvet. She lifted it out, set it on the table, placed the wrapped doll inside the box, closed the lid. "We'll keep her safe," she said. Silas stared at the box. His chest rose and fell, rose and fell. "Where should she go?" Martha asked. He looked at the high shelf. "The place where important things lived. There," he said. Martha carried the box to the shelf, had to stand on her toes to reach, placed it careful, stepped back. The box sat in plain sight, not hidden, not forgotten, just honored. Silas walked to the shelf, stood looking up at it. His hand rose, touched the edge of the box, just barely. "She'll be safe there," Martha said again. He nodded. His hand fell. He turned to her. "Thank you," he said. They stood in the lamplight. The cabin settled around them. Different now. Changed. Finally, Martha walked to the door, but she didn't go out. She turned back. "Good night, Silas," she said. He looked at her, really looked, his face open, unguarded. "Good night, Martha." She went out, walked to the well, pumped water, washed her face and hands in the cold. The stars were bright overhead, more than she'd ever seen. When she came back in, Silas was still standing by the shelf, looking up at the box. She went to the bed, sat down, unlaced her boots. He turned, looked at her. "I'll sleep in the barn," he said. "You don't have to." "I know, but—" He gestured at the room, at the space. "Not yet. Not till—" "I understand." He nodded, walked to the door, put his hand on the latch. "Martha." "Yes, the hairbrush, on the mantel. It's yours now, if you want it." She looked at the brush, at the worn wood and soft bristles. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll use it tomorrow." He went out, the door closed, soft. Martha lay back on the bed, pulled the blanket up. The straw tick rustled. The cabin creaked. Outside, the barn light appeared. But different now. Not the lantern of a man hiding, just the light of someone settling in for the night. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd use Emma's brush, would pull it through her hair and not feel like a thief, would feel like someone who'd been given a gift. Tomorrow they'd work the garden together, would build whatever came next. Tomorrow. But tonight she lay in the dark and listened to the cabin breathe, to the wind outside, to the silence that wasn't empty anymore, and realized something that made her breath catch. The provision sack. The one he'd given her that first day, 1 week's worth. If you're smart, you'll use it to leave. She'd used it to stay. Had walked down the mountain with it empty and brought it back full. Had planted seeds with the last of her money. Had chosen this place, this man, this life. And he'd never asked her to. She sat up, looked at the door, at the window where the barn light burned. He'd given her a choice from the very beginning. Had respected it even when it hurt him. Had let her leave or stay on her own terms. That was the gift. Not the brush, not the cabin, not even the question he'd asked tonight. The gift was the choice. And she'd made it. She lay back down, pulled the blanket close, and wondered if he knew that was the reason she'd stayed. Martha sat on the porch step with the hairbrush in her hand. Evening light slanted across the yard, turning the dust gold. Behind her, the garden grew in neat rows, tiny green shoots just breaking through the dark soil where she'd planted basil and sage and mint. The fence Silas had built stood straight and solid around it. She pulled the brush through her hair. Slow strokes. The bristles were worn smooth, soft against her scalp. Someone else's hand had held this brush every morning for years, had pulled it through different hair, darker maybe, curlier. She didn't know, hadn't asked. Silas sat on the step below her. His whittling knife worked a piece of pine. Shavings fell around his boots. He was making something. She could see it taking shape now. A spoon. Kitchen spoon. The bowl carved smooth. The handle getting thinner with each pass of the blade. The windowsill inside held herb bundles now, tied with string and hanging upside down to dry. Wild sage from the garden's first clearing, the space where the cloth doll had sat for weeks. Empty now. The doll lived on the high shelf in its muslin wrapping. Safe, honored, not forgotten. "You stayed," Silas said. Not a question, just words spoken to the evening air. "Yes. Why?" Martha kept brushing. Thought about the answer, all the small reasons that added up to the choice. "Because you gave me a choice," she said. "The provision sack. You'd have let me leave." He nodded. The knife kept moving. A curl of wood fell away and caught the light. "Didn't want you to feel trapped," he said. "Bad enough I was. Didn't need two of us stuck in it." "I'm not stuck. No." He looked up at her. "You're not." They sat. The wind moved through the garden, brought the smell of turned earth and the first hints of the herbs trying to grow. A hawk circled high up. Its shadow passed over the yard and was gone. Martha's hair fell loose around her shoulders now. She gathered it, pulled the brush through again, the motion steady. Familiar already, even though she'd only been using Emma's brush for 2 days. He'd set it on the table that first morning after their talk, just placed it beside her coffee cup. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. She'd picked it up and understood. This was hers now. Not borrowed. Not stolen. Given. "Will you stay?" Silas asked. His hand stopped moving. The knife rested against the wood. He didn't look at her. "I mean," he cleared his throat, "not as help, as—" He couldn't find the word. Martha watched him struggle with it, saw his jaw work, saw him set down the knife and the half-carved spoon. "As your wife?" she asked. He turned, met her eyes. "As my wife," he said. "My helpmate, for all our days." "Yes." "I didn't finish." "Don't need to." "Yes." His breath came out rough, like he'd been holding it without knowing. His hands opened and closed on his knees. "You're sure?" "Yes." "It won't be easy. I'm not easy." "I know. And I can't promise about him." "I'm not asking for promises, just tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days we get." He nodded, picked up the wood and knife again. His hands shook slightly. He gripped tighter until they steadied. Martha started brushing again, the rhythm soothing, the evening settling around them like a quilt. Everything was the same. The cabin, the barn, the mountains rising behind, the dust in the yard. Everything was different. The silence between them now held something other than emptiness, held presence, held choosing. A coyote called from somewhere up the ridge. Another answered. The sound carried across the valley and faded. "Garden's coming in," Silas said. "Yes. You did that. We did that. You built the fence. You planted the seeds. You gave me the space to plant them." He was quiet. The knife worked. Another curl of wood fell. "What are you making?" Martha asked. "Spoon, kitchen spoon. Thought you could use one." "The ones we have are worn down." She looked at the shape emerging from the pine, saw the bowl forming, the handle taking shape. "Thank you," she said. "Not done yet. Still, thank you." The sun touched the mountaintops. The light went orange, then red, then purple. Shadows stretched across the yard. The garden disappeared into dusk. Martha finished brushing her hair, braided it loose, tied it with a piece of string from her pocket. They stood together, walked inside. The cabin waited. Familiar now. Hers as much as his. She built up the fire in the stove. He filled the water bucket from the well. Small tasks done side by side. No words needed. She set out the dishes for morning. He checked the door latch, made sure the iron bar was secure. The lamp sat on the table. She lit it. The flame caught and grew. Yellow light filled the room and pushed the darkness to the corners. They moved around each other. Easy, natural, like a dance they'd learned without trying. Martha shook out her blanket, smoothed it on the bed. Silas did the same with his bedroll in the corner he'd claimed 2 nights ago when he'd stopped sleeping in the barn. Still separate, still careful. But the distance between felt smaller, like one day soon it might close completely. Or maybe not. Maybe this was enough. This careful respect for space and time. She sat on the edge of the bed, unlaced her boots, set them aside. Her feet ached. Good ache, the kind that came from honest work. Silas banked the fire. The coals glowed red through the grate. Heat radiated out, enough to last till morning. Martha reached for the lamp, put her hand on the base, looked at Silas. He nodded. She blew out the flame. Darkness rushed in. Complete. The kind of dark that only came in the mountains, far from any town, any other light. She lay back on the bed, pulled the blanket up. The straw-tick mattress rustled under her weight. She heard Silas settle into his bedroll, heard the fabric shift, heard his breathing steady. "Thank you," he said. Soft. Almost too soft to hear. For what? For seeing past the silence. Martha thought about that. About the weeks of quiet. The meals eaten without words. The work done side by side. The way silence could be full instead of empty. "Thank you for letting me stay in it with you," she said. The cabin held them. 4 walls and a roof. Nothing special. Just logs and chinking and a floor that creaked. But it felt like more now. Felt like the beginning of something. Not an ending. A door opening instead of closing. "Good night, Martha. Good night, Silas." Outside the wind picked up, moved through the cottonwoods, through the garden where the seeds were growing in the dark, where the fence stood protecting what they'd planted together. The mountains rose black against the stars. The creek ran cold over smooth stones. Somewhere an owl hunted. Somewhere the coyotes sang. And in the cabin 2 people lay in the darkness and breathed and rested and waited for morning. In the morning there would be coffee. Martha would make it while Silas checked the stock. They would sit at the table and eat together. He might speak, or he might not. Either way would be fine. There would be work, the garden to tend, the cabin to keep, fences to mend, wood to split, all the small tasks that made a life. There would be silence, and there would be words. There would be distance, and there would be closeness. There would be days when the grief rose up, and days when it stayed quiet. But they would face it together, not as savior and saved, not as whole and broken, just as two people who had chosen each other, who had looked at the hard truth of what they were and decided it was enough. Martha closed her eyes, felt sleep pulling at her. Let it come. The last thing she heard was Silas shifting in his bedroll, getting comfortable. The sound of another person in the room. Not a ghost, not a memory, just a man. Breathing, living. Here. And that was enough. That was everything. There's something quiet that happens when two people stop trying to save each other and just choose to stay. It sits heavy in the chest, tender, maybe. Unresolved in ways that feel familiar. We carry so much alone. Many of us. Things we think no one would understand. Grief that doesn't fit the timelines people expect. The weight of being unseen, or of loving without recognition, or of building something small when the world wants grand gestures. Some of us know what it's like to plant seeds in hard ground and not be sure they'll ever break through. To offer kindness when it's easier to close the door. This story doesn't tie itself into a neat bow. Silas and Martha don't become different people. The cabin is still just a cabin. The silence still holds ghosts. And perhaps that's all right. Perhaps some things are allowed to rest unfinished. Perhaps choosing each other, day after day, in all the ordinary ways, is enough without needing to be more. Thank you for sitting with this, for staying through the quiet parts.